Welcome to the Ignium Sparks podcast. I'm Phil Rose, your host, and today I'm joined for a collaborative conversation with Dean Heffta. Dean works with leaders and helps them through coaching, communications training, and leadership development. And he runs a great business called Claris Results. And I'm always interested in when people use the word Claris, because Claris has a meaning to me. And I'd just like to ask Dean, what does Claris Results mean, and what is it you do?
Hey, it's great to be here, Phil, and I'm glad to have you on my podcast as well. This is a neat experience for us to interview each other and share the content and introduce our audiences to each other. And that's a great question, right? So the word Claris, and I get asked that, it really goes back to the Latin roots of the word around clarity or clear. And when I was starting my practice, my vision was really about helping leaders and individuals increase the clarity, not only about themselves as individuals, because we bring ourselves to everything we do, but also what is our organization here to do? Can we increase the clarity of that? And that really brings us to understanding personal awareness, understanding the direction of our organization, the purpose our organization exists, and the things that must be done for us to achieve our goals. And for me, it's that illumination, bringing the light and increasing the clarity so that we can have those moments to say, now I know what I need to do. And that's, for me, my guiding light in the interactions that I have with leaders and organizations.
Yeah.
How about for you? Tell me about Ignium.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? We both go to that Latin word. And it takes me back to my Latin when I was at school, actually, Dean. And I never learned the word Ignium at school, but I did Latin to what we called O levels in the UK, which ages me because O levels stopped the year I finished it and moved on to something called GCSE. So for any UK listeners, O levels stopped in 1987. And I did Latin as O level. And Latin, it's interesting. I always had the phrase in my mind, Latin is a dead language. It's as dead can be. It killed the ancient Romans and now it's killing me, which I come back to because that's the one thing of Latin I still remember. But having said that, I take the bit of Latin that I love. And for me, I went to Rome a few years ago, and I love going around Rome and looking at it and realizing now as an older person, the layers of history that sit in Rome. And Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. It took many years. And for me, when I created Ignium with Kerry, we wanted a name that meant something, but gave us some clarity, and use the word clarity around Claris. For me, Ignium was the word we chose because it means to ignite. And we wanted specifically to ignite people's passion for their business or reignite their passion. Because for us, once you've got a business, often we all go into business with this passionate way of doing things. And I talk about people getting onto the journey with real excitement and gusto and thinking, hey, this is my purpose in life is to run this business. I'm excited. And over time, that excitement sometimes fizzles out. And we want to help people pick up that journey again and reignite and boost themselves back up into orbit of where they want to be. So Ignium is about igniting that passion. And we call our podcast Sparks because we want to ignite the spark in your business and reignite that spark, which then engages your team. Because if you can get your team built behind that spark, actually we get the whole world turning. And to me, that's what Ignium is. So I go back to my Latin roots and think, actually, I did take some good stuff away from it. And it was that love of what language really means and how we can bring that to bear and what Ignium consulting is. And interesting, we call it Ignium Consulting. Actually, we're a mix of consulting and coaching. And I sit more on the coaching arm because that's what I love. And I think I started life as an engineer and slowly over time moved into strategy consulting. But I realized actually the real benefit for people comes from coaching them. And when I help them find the spark in themselves, I know I can help them do great things for themselves. So that's where I come at the world from.
That's, if I may, Phil, right now there's this very powerful movement around coaching. And it's a very commonly used phrase in business and in the world. And from your perspective, like what makes great coaching unique? What sets it apart from consulting?
That's a really good question, actually. I used to talk about an and conversation, coaching and consulting. And I think sometimes, as a pure coach, we ask questions. As a pure consultant, you give answers. And to answer your question in a slightly longer way, I started life as an engineer. And as an engineer at Rolls-Royce, I was paid for the answers I gave because the answers I gave literally kept planes in the sky because that's what our engines did. So I had to get things right. And the difference I found of coaching over the last 20 years is actually that coaching is about helping other people find their own answer. Because actually, it's not my answer that matters. It's your answer as the individual I'm talking to. And so often as consultants, we come in and we give people the answers. And actually, that's a bit like give a man a fish and I'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish and I'll eat for a lifetime. Coaching is about helping you find that real answer in yourself or your business. And then you can start doing it to other people. If everyone started coaching, we can actually really dig into what's going on for people. So to me, pure coaching, and I'm an ICF, International Coaching Federation accredited coach. And for me, coaching is around co-creation of ideas, but me bringing the questions which enable you as the client, if I was working with you, to come up with your answer that matters to you. That's what's key. And I think that's I don't know how you see coaching. Tell me what your thoughts on that, because obviously you sit in the same space as me in that coaching sense. What's your take on that?
Yeah, certainly. And from I would imagine from your engineering history, it can be very easy to fall into that solving problems for others mode. So it takes a lot of self-awareness. I know from my experience, it's very easy to have a tendency to want to help people when they say, here, what do you think I should do? And putting on that coaching hat, it takes really, my experience is a self-management and a self-awareness to be able to hold back, or at least recognize that in this moment, I have an opinion that I think they should follow. But then I also look at the experience that most people don't take advice.
Yeah.
And what's really going to make a difference, and why I'm passionate about coaching, is that people believe more of what they conclude. And so I'm going to be able to have a bigger impact on their outcomes if I'm helping them with their conclusions rather than giving them answers. Like, the world isn't lacking for knowledge. I mean, if the world was lacking for knowledge, everybody would work out every day. Nobody would be overweight. Nobody'd be smoking. Everybody be millionaires. Like, people aren't broke because they don't know better, right? So how do I, in that conversation, in that moment, have the ability to ask a different question that helps to create that awareness of what they can do or what they should do or what needs to be done, that they actually believe? And I think that's where coaching, even in consulting practices like both you and I have, coaching comes in as kind of that X factor of creating the change that lasts rather than the change that fixes that problem in the moment.
Do you know, I think there's two things you said there which really resonate with me. That word awareness. And it reminds me of something, and I can't remember who this is attributed to. I think it's Eckhart Tolle, and which says awareness is the greatest agent for change. And to me, as a coach, use that word awareness. Actually, that's what we do. We help bring things that other people can't see to their awareness. And it's a bit like holding up that mirror. And I think too often we look in the mirror and we see what we want to see. We don't see, you use the example, the overweight, the drunk, the person who's not been to the gym for a long time. We don't see that. We see what we want to see. And I think what a great coach does is they hold up the mirror and really help you look in it and say, this is what you see. And for anyone that's listening, I'm holding my hand to Dean now saying, this is your mirror. Because actually we can bring that awareness. And that's, I think you mentioned that X factor. That's the bit that brings the lasting change. When people really see what's in there. As an example, I was on a coaching supervision session for my own benefit this morning, where I'm working with other coaches, and I'm very good at coaching myself. But what I've realized over time is I often ask myself the easy question. I don't do it consciously, but I give myself the easy way out. And what I think a coach does, a coach helps you look at the journey a different way and say, okay, if you go this route all the time and keep taking the right lane, where are you going to end up? But actually, sometimes you may want to take the other route. And that's sometimes the hard questions to ask yourself. And as a coach, I think our role is to stay out of collusion with the client to make sure that they get the results they need, not the results they would normally get if they asked themselves those questions. So our secret sauce, use that word lasting change, is enabling them to really create lasting change for themselves by asking the difficult questions sometimes, and sometimes the ones that don't want to be asked. And it reminds me, I've done a LinkedIn post recently, and it talked about the word conflict. And I think sometimes conflict comes because we don't ask the right questions of ourselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are we are continually making meaning of the world around us, and that meaning is based on the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Where do those stories come from? It comes from the things that we see, the story we tell about the thing that we see, and then we begin to become mind readers about other people's intentions, or things like that. And I have to be very cautious of not trying to become a mind reader.
Yeah.
And it's not helpful, because now I begin imposing my beliefs, my experiences, my intents onto
Mm,
others. And if they're doing something that is in a way different than I would have done, now I'm beginning to assume that they're doing that on purpose,
yeah.
with malintent towards me. And then suddenly we we aren't communicating at all.
And I think there's a really big thing on that, isn't it? Because I think too often, we all know what assume means, and I think too often we do make those assumptions, and we assume so much about each other. And that point about mind reading, I remember when I set up my first real business, I realized as an engineer, sales was the bit I needed to learn. And Marcus, who helped with my sales back in 2005, used to use a process called the Sandler sales training technique. And if you ever come across Sandler is just an approach, but it's a very good approach to helping you understand things. And Sandler is about really getting under the skin of the question, the questions the prospect needs to ask for themselves. Now, I'm not a sales trainer. That's not what I do. But the bit that sticks in my mind is no mind reading. Because actually, once we start mind reading, we just assume what the prospect needs. And it's the same in a coaching perspective. If we're assuming, if we're mind reading, it's our thinking that's going into your head, not yours. And that may not be where you want to go. Just because I see the world this way doesn't mean you don't see it a different way. I think that's the key that really comes in as a coaching. It's a powerful coaching tool, I think.
I've got a comment and then a question for people who want to get better at coaching themselves that I'm curious about from you. But the one thing I was thinking about here was um, a comment from Carl Jung that said, the thing you most want to find is where you least want to look.
Mm,
And that seems to be the place where great coaches spend their time, is helping people find those places they don't really want to look, maybe, and lifting some of those lids so we can see those things. But I'm curious, if I'm a listener of this and I hear that comment you made about self-coaching, and I recognize that that could help me in the conversations I'm having with myself. How do I improve my self-coaching?
that's a great question, isn't it? Because we all think we're good at these things, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? I read a book which is on my bookshelf over here called The $1 Trillion Coach, and one of the authors of that is Eric Schmidt, ex of Google, and he used a phrase which I used to quote, and I'll get it wrong, which basically along the lines of everybody needs a coach. And to me, the reason we all need a coach is like we often talk about sports teams having coaches, and a coach is that person who can see things that you can't see. They can stand on the sidelines, they can watch the game in action, and they can see stuff that you can't see because they're not in it. And I think this thing with self-coaching is we're in it sometimes, and therefore we can't see the woods around us. We're stuck in it. And sometimes we need to raise ourselves up above it. And I have to say, use the word, what's the context? What's the context for the decisions I'm making at this point in time? What's the context for the journey I'm on? What's the context for the other person? Or without assuming it, and then saying, okay, and what also could it be? So sometimes you come back to the quote you raised there about the answer you want to, the thing you most want to find is where you least want to look. I think sometimes to self-coach ourselves, we need to ask us, where would we look? And then say, and where would someone else look? What's the other question we want to ask? Because I think then we might come up with a different answer. Or the phrase that often has been used is, what would XYZ person do? How would they look at it? And choose anybody you want to put in there for XYZ. Mm-hmm. But then you can get a different perspective on it. What would they see if they were solving the same problem? What would Einstein see? What would Jung see? Or bring it closer to home, come up with somebody that you know that who's successful in running a business. How would they look at this? Because you use that word map of the world. And from an NLP perspective, an NLP, for those who don't know, it's a combination of lots of other psychologies coming together. But from an NLP perspective, we say the map is not the territory. because actually you and I could both look at a map of the same piece of land and we can perceive it in different ways. And I think too often that within self-coaching, we look at the map and we see what we want to see. We miss the obvious. So I think my view is on self-coaching, actually, look around to what's the thing that's really that you should be looking at, not the things you're looking for.
I love it.
That
And
makes
it's
sense.
maybe being aware enough to just ask a few more questions and not settle at the first answer that pops into our head about the why or my performance. And in many ways now with the digitization of a lot of things, we have more access to being able to see ourselves. We can record meetings, we can record presentations, we can record things and listen to them. Now, I haven't met anybody that enjoys hearing their own voice or seeing themselves on camera. And so it can be painful. But if you remove yourself and look objectively at it and say, okay, if I was watching this, what would be the things that stand out to me? And looking at it not as in judging yourself, but observing that person as the performer. And maybe that gives us some different perspectives.
And actually, that's an interesting coaching technique, isn't it? Because a lot of the time we talk about metaphorically sitting in different chairs. And from a coaching perspective, you asked about how people self-coach themselves. I've been running a workshop in the UK in the last few months, in fact, helping people understand conflict and how they have different conversations and conflict in whatever that means to people. And I asked them to think about a situation where they avoid conflict because they're scared or they've got some fear going on for them. And I asked them then to say, okay, let's unpack it and ask them, let's go and sit in the other person's chair, metaphorically, walk in their shoes and just say, what could be going on for that person? If I was them, seeing the world through their eyes as they see it, hearing the world through their ears, sensing it the way they do, what would they see, feel, and hear? And now we can't presuppose it, but we can actually just come up with some assumptions and then say, if that's what they're seeing and hearing, feeling, what might we need to do differently? And I think it's an interesting one. And I'll finish this bit first and I'll come on to that. The bit then to say, okay, and now if I was an observer watching those two people having the interaction, watching me having the interaction with that person, which I'm fearful of, if that's the case, what would I see as a third party outside of this view? And how could I then take it and say, okay, what would I do differently? What would I notice about those two people? What would I notice about the way they're standing? What would I notice about the way they're talking to each other? What would I notice about the way they're, and I use the word here, egos are getting in the way sometimes. Because actually, that's the big thing that really stops most people is because their ego is shutting them down. It's stopping them seeing what they really need to see. And therefore, the conflict just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it's two egos clashing head on. And I think that's the frame is. But it takes quite a big step to be able to do that on your own, to step out and float out of your body, so to speak, and see it from a different angle. But that's one way I say self-coaching. If you can do that, it's a marvelous opportunity.
Yeah, it's very, very meta, if you will. And one of the things that I've found to be helpful when you mention conflict and really, that breakdown of communication is one of the tools that I use is called process communication model in helping people become more self-aware and aware of what's happening around them with others. And what the science from process communication model has found is, inside all of us, we've got access to 6 different perceptions of the world.
Okay.
And one of those 6 is likely going to be very strong for us in how we perceive the world. And that's going to affect the information that comes in that we use to process. And so for some people, the 6 is really using thoughts, what's the facts that I'm looking for? Could be opinions, using my value system to understand and process the world. It might be emotions, how I'm feeling about things and experiencing the emotions around me. Or reflections, the visualizations of possibilities in my own mind, or reactions, right? The likes and the dislikes and how I react to the world, or actions where I'm focused on what's the doing that we can do. And if you look at that, if I'm not aware of the perception I'm using, I'm going to project the assumption that the other person I'm interacting with is going to use the same perception as me.
Yeah, interesting.
So if my strongest one is thoughts using facts and logic, and I am interacting with somebody that is primarily using emotion, I'm going to, deep down, I'm thinking there's something wrong with them. They're not thinking clearly.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, how often do we see that in people? Because we think that there's something wrong with them. They're not thinking clearly. So tell me more about that. So process communication model, 6 perceptions. I wrote down there: thoughts, opinions, emotions, reflections, reactions, and actions. So how would people go about finding out where they're coming at the world from? Because that's quite interesting. You've got to understand where you're coming at first before you can do something about it.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, certainly it's a very deep science. NASA was really behind a lot of the science in the development during their shuttle program,
Okay.
and Pixar Studios uses it. So there's a very deep science behind it, but it's also very simple. So you think about that. What do I connect with when I think about those things? Do I, in that moment, in that meeting, am I thinking about organization and structure and logic and facts? And we need to find more information about this. If that's my
Yeah.
tendency, that's probably one of my strongest ways of experiencing the world,
Okay.
right? Or do I find myself really focused on, the purpose and the commitment and the value and the impact and sharing my opinion and wanting to know other people's opinions, and can I trust this person? Well, if that's where I tend to, I'm probably pretty strong in that opinion perception.
Yeah.
Or on the emotion side, is it really about, how are they going to feel about this change, and
Mhm.
how I feel about this relationship, and I'm just not sure that they really like me and care for me. So I'm very tuned into that emotional side.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
going to be part of that perception. Reflections, when I'm thinking about possibilities and that movie projector is running in my mind and I'm imagining things that maybe other people aren't even seeing. That's very reflection. Reaction is, do I want to have a good time and be with people that are fun and lively and give me a high five and react to things, that gets me excited, and tell a funny joke? Or am I really about what's the challenge? What's the
Yeah.
goal? And let's do something. I don't want to sit here and talk for 2 hours about what we could do. I'm going out and I'm going to make it happen.
I
And when
love that.
people immediately have a reaction of what they know they aren't very connected with and what really resonates with them. And
Yeah.
so that can begin giving us some windows into, this is why my spouse and I have these frustrations, on vacation, is because we're seeing such different things.
And I'm laughing as you say that, because it is, you mentioned spouse. Often that's where we see those differences really come out with the person we know the most. There's this disconnect between where people are at, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because we often marry people who are like us, but also unlike us. And I think when you talk about their thoughts and opinions, I'm just thinking about my wife, and she won't listen to this podcast because I've asked that before. But if she was listening to it, she would come back, and she's very much the emotional one. She'll see it from the emotion point of view. She'll reflect on things, whereas I'm more of the thinking side of things. And I think it's really interesting how you put that across, just to help you understand what you can do differently about it, and just reflecting, where is that other person coming from? And
And the
often,
good news is we have access to all 6 of them.
okay,
We
okay.
have them in us. This isn't a question of different types of people, like, oh, well, I'm not the emotion person. Well, in fact, that is a part of me, and I can use that to connect.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? So the thoughts going through my mind is a lot of models in business and in communication. They're all, I use the word, simplifications of reality. And often we try and overcomplicate these models, because to me, that's a great model. When you talk there about process communication model, that model is a simplification. It puts us into those areas. But the bit you said there is, we all have the ability. We've all got those within us already, but we choose to go down a different preference because of the way we are. It's the way we, often I think about, it's your values and the beliefs, and just maybe the way you've been schooled or educated over the years will take you down this route. But what you're saying is that we've all got the ability to go into any one of these if we needed to. And actually, you then see the world through a different set of eyes, which is fascinating in the sense of just building that model up. And people listening to this, we talked there about how would you self-coach people. And if you could look at the world through a different perspective, you would see different things. And I think that's a powerful point to take away for people using that process communication model. Is that how you would typically use it?
I it's there's so many applications, but when you think about the work that you do with strategy and helping companies scale up, we know that there's a critical component of innovation as a part of that.
Yeah, yeah.
And if we're going to innovate, we have to be able to see opportunities in ways that we haven't seen them before. We have to be creative in how we bring pieces together. And we need all six of those perceptions to really come to life, whether it's in ourself or in our teams, if we're going to understand what innovation and growth really means in serving our customers.
Yeah.
And if we're too narrow, let's say our leadership team are, all of us are completely focused on the thoughts, the facts, the logic. We're going to convince ourselves that we see the whole world,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we're missing a huge opportunity to really think more creatively and more effectively. And so being conscious, whether it's ourselves saying, hey, how do we acknowledge the emotional aspect of this change?
Mm, mm.
Or we need to bring somebody to that conversation that can help us to understand it differently.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It reminds me of a process which I've been using over the last few years. Design thinking, and one of the aspects of design thinking is enable you to do that, to see the world through different perspectives. And you talked there about business models and strategy, because I think this is one of the key things through this last period of pandemic. We've all had to see the world differently. All had to perceive it, and also we've also been aware of other people perceiving the world differently. If in the UK we've been in lockdown for a number of times over the last 12 months, where people have not been able to leave their homes, they've not been able to go to work, they've not been able to use public transport, and even as the world opens up for us, we're still restricted, and a lot of people still perceive they can't do it because they're running some other pattern which says I can't do these things. And I'm not going to go into what those things might be, but actually I think we need to all be cognizant of that for people. Because if we're trying to design businesses or products, we need to think about, well, how would other people understand that? How would they perceive it? That's not to say we can develop a product that fits everybody's needs, but actually in developing a product or a service, we have to be thinking about that from that perspective to understand, how would that come across to our customers? What would they think of it? And how would they use it? And I think that's the thought that came to my mind when you talked about innovation.
And I think that's the power that when you talk about coaching and the questions that go with coaching, that as leaders, we can take many lessons away from the world of pure coaching and apply them in our role of improving our ability to understand ourselves, our customer, the world, and the opportunities around us. Because great coaching is really built on great questions. And I think that can help everybody lead at a higher level.
Yeah, I get that. So I've got a question for you. And it links into what you're saying there about coaching and leaders and pure coaching. So one of the things we've seen over this last year, at least, and there's been a big movement around this, is very much around the word vulnerability and leaders stepping up to become their authentic self. And often we have to question who we are so that we can lead from behind and lead from in front. I wonder, what's your thoughts on that in terms of the leadership teams you've worked with, the people you've worked with? How often do you see inauthentic leaders stepping forward and making a transition and opening themselves up? Is it something you've witnessed?
It's an interesting topic, and I guess on one hand, I'm reluctant to say, to give advice. Okay, the advice thing, but the concept of authenticity. For me, I guess for leaders, I move towards congruence. And that is, how do we build trust among the people who have entrusted us with the role of leadership? Because there's always this aspect of leadership has been granted to us. It's really not about a power structure. Every time we're using power to get things done, we're actually giving up our influence. And so it's really not about power. It is about leadership. But what does it mean to be authentic? Does that mean that I have to, confess to you about this mistake I made when I was 22 years old and I'm just being authentic here? And for me, it's like, well, I don't really care, right? People are self-interested, and it's like, I don't want you to be your whole self. I want you to be your best self as my leader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's where I think authenticity of intent.
Yeah.
No, what is their intent? Where are they headed? How are they serving? Is very important. But this wholeness of authenticity, and I want to
Yeah.
share with everybody about my fear of spiders. It's like I really don't care, right? I am here to achieve a mission, and that's why I'm excited. I'd like to continue our conversation too, when we can, here for the next portion of this, of understanding purpose and that excitement piece
Yeah.
from you. So that's
Yeah.
my first
Yeah.
reaction when I think about authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Is
interesting.
it's like many things, good in healthy doses, but too much of it becomes toxic, just like water.
Yeah. 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 That's very good. Very good. I love that answer. And I'll tell you the reason I asked that question before we got to purpose, because you talked about coaching and leadership. I think it has been banded around areas, that being your best self as a leader is what I really want. In fact, what you said is, I want you to be your best self as my leader. And I think that's the key that I hear there and take away from that. So great point. I thought I'd just ask that. So um, purpose, because that's the key as well. And one of the things I think from your perspective, and again, maybe that's a word that's been banded around too much over the last few years as well. I don't really think. What's your take on purpose then?
Well, that's a great point, right? So some of the advice to, you know, I feel for young people who, are entering adulthood and their work lives and all those things, because there's this enormous pressure that I don't think that you and I maybe felt when we were young, of this pressure to, find purpose and meaning and do something amazing. And
Yeah,
that is an enormous thing to feel the burden of. And I think in many ways it's a disservice to young people to say you need to find a career that has purpose and meaning. It's like, I don't even know what that means. And the fact of the matter is like, maybe you just need to go help people, and maybe you help people by being an electrician. Like, that's okay. Like, do something productive and healthy and
yeah,
that you can be good at, and meaning can be applied to doing good. But
yeah,
I think purpose, when I think about it, is maybe tied back to the coaching side. And that is, as an organization, can we operate on purpose, which I tie to intent, rather than just saying, let's stay busy and let's do things and try to maximize shareholder return? Well, let's operate towards a purpose.
yeah,
And I think that's a very important aspect of it. So I'd be curious. I know purpose is a big part of what you bring to your
mm.
clients. And you said people begin the company or begin their journey, we'll say hair on fire, like all excited,
Yeah,
and then it wanes, right? The energy kind of flames out, and your hope is to change that trajectory and reignite.
yeah,
So how do you see purpose, and how do you see its role in that
yeah.
ignition of their excitement?
It's a great question. I think it's to me, I always talk to people about, on day one, most people understand what they're planning on doing with their business to some degree. And interesting, I'm just listening on Audible to the Steve Jobs autobiography by Walter Isaacson. And it's it's 20 or so hours long, and I'm about halfway through it. And the interesting thing is when they talk about the startup of Apple, and later on we've heard people talk about Apple, the purpose being around making a dent in the universe and bringing people together to create something that was going to change the way people did things. And Jobs had this vision of what he was trying to create in terms of vision of the future of technology, but lots of other things as well. And to me, there was a purpose there, but I don't think it was articulated right at the beginning. I don't think if you asked Wozniak and Jobs what they were planning on doing right at the beginning and why they were doing it, they wouldn't have had that understanding. Now, I may be wrong, and people might come back to me and say that wasn't the case. But for me, day one of starting a business is exciting because you're doing it for yourself or with the people around you. And I would say people they have a commercial or a cultural perspective on their purpose. They either want to go out and make loads of money, become the next unicorn and sell out for millions, or they want to change the world in some way. And as they go through that journey, what I've seen is a lot of people get to a point where they change. They've either, if they've made all the money they want, they then say, I want to go and change the world in some way. But what I'm seeing over the last few years is some businesses saying, actually, our intent is to change the world in some small way, to do something different, to create something. And I often liken this, Jack, and the purpose of businesses in the past, people used to say about creating shareholder value. And that never gelled with me. I remember I did my MBA back 20 or so years ago, and we always talked about shareholder value. And it never really resonated because I was thinking, why am I coming to work just to make someone else rich? And what I've seen over the last few years, and this happened 2018, I think it was now, 181 US businesses signed up to say, we want to stand for something above and beyond making money. And on my wall here, I've got the 17 UN sustainability goals. And whether you believe it or not, there's 17 things that businesses could sign up to or say, okay, this is what's really important to us as a world. And I think if you can create a business that stands for one of these, I think you can start to engage people because you can say, this is what we're about. We're not here just to make money. We're here to do one of these other things. And if you do that, hey, guess what? You'll probably end up making loads of money and being able to do good with it. So to me, purpose and intent, I think, comes through thinking about what do you stand for. So for me, if I look at the sustainability goals at the moment, there's some key ones for me around education. Because for me, education is the start, it's the foundation. Now, if you looked at other people, take out those sustainability goals and say, like, I prefer something else. But to me, education starts things moving. And if I can help educate people through my coaching, that maybe they've got a choice in the world, that they can do things differently. That just because they come from that neighborhood or they've been born to those parents or they went to that school or didn't go to university, doesn't mean they can't do something different. They can actually step up and do something. And I think businesses has got a great role to play in that in terms of helping people understand that purpose matters, because that's what engages the hearts and minds of the employees that come to work. And there's an oft-quoted thing that I often say that if you don't have a purpose, people just come to work for your money. But if you've got a purpose, they come to work with their heart, sweat, blood, tears to do the work and actually achieve something. So that's how I see purpose now. And I think that piece you asked me around where do people go. So they start off day one really excited. They then go through a journey and at some point they achieve something. And then they think, what else is there? And that's the bit I want to work with. Not all businesses get that. Some people just want to make money. And hey, I'm okay with that if that's what they need. My belief is they can do good with that money as well. Does that make sense in that?
Yeah, it's spot on. I think it's really powerful. And I think, as a leader, being intentional about stepping back and saying, okay, so for what purpose?
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, everybody in an organization serves the customer.
Yeah.
Whether you're on the front line of working with customers or not, it is about solving some problem, serving the customer in some way.
Yeah.
Even, so it's like even a business who states we're here to maximize shareholder return, which is like the least inspiring statement you can make. In order for that to happen, there has to be some problem they're solving, or some service they're bringing to the customer. So even in an organization where that's stated, there's a purpose under there that's hiding.
Yeah.
And it can be revealed.
Yeah.
And I think one of the places that leaders have a huge opportunity of impacting the lives of their teams is being able to connect the dots between activity and impact. And that's a place that I think is a unique spot for leaders to be able to really spend time and energy, because we know that when employees can see the connection between the work they're doing and the difference it's making, to your point, they become more engaged, they become more creative, they become more committed.
Yeah.
And too often we're leaving it up to the individuals to hopefully decipher what that impact is. And why not just make it easier?
Yeah.
And that can happen through storytelling and through question asking and through taking field trips to see our customers and spending time with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And there was one quote I often remember, and this, you've got this on your website, and it says, where there's exceptional performance, you'll find great communication. And to me, the bit that resonates with me, and I'm going to ask you your view on it in a minute, is about that storytelling. It's about conveying what the message is and getting people willingly on the bus. And people who are willing on the us become the A players who want to move with you. And I wonder, from your perspective, you mentioned storytelling. How do people best communicate what they're about so it really engages? And especially, I look to younger people. I've got 15 and 18-year-old daughters at the moment. They're going to go into the workplace at some stage. And I don't know what they're going to be doing, but they need to be engaged, in my view, in what they're doing. So I wonder, what's your thoughts on that storytelling, and how do we get the message across of what purpose really means?
Well, story, it's a great thing to ponder, because storytelling can feel like this very formal skill that, oh, I mean, I'm just not a good storyteller, and I've never learned storytelling, and I didn't take that class, and it can feel like something that other people are really good at. But storytelling is a part of our history for thousands of years. I mean, it is how we conveyed lessons and
Yeah,
skills and
yeah,
morals.
yeah,
It came through stories. And so when we go back to our childhood, all we have to do is go read a great children's book. They're
yeah,
simple,
yeah,
and it's a very simple arc of, there was some challenge and a choice and a result, and we're putting that in. Maybe it's a couple of rabbits, or some sort of story, but each of us have experiences where there's illustrations that we can use in very simple
mhm,
ways. I think about
yeah,
a medical manufacturing company here in the States that was struggling to really get their quality to a high enough level. They tried every type of process improvement, and they couldn't get the quality up. And so what they did is they brought their staff out to the people using their products,
okay,
and they heard firsthand the stories of what people's lives were being impacted by the products they were creating. And through that, quality changed.
yeah,
Suddenly, meaning was a part of the work that I did every day, and I could visualize the person on the that's using our products. And that's a firsthand story that they were able to experience and hear. And we all have that ability, regardless of the role, of whether it's with our children or our neighbors or our employees. We can use and think about, what's a story that could help illustrate this.
yeah, yeah. And I love that story, and it almost brought a tear to my eye just hearing that, because I was imagining something. I've got a friend of mine who works for a company that manufactures diabetes products. And actually, if you were to extrapolate that in terms of talking to the end user, who your product is saving their life, is changing what they do, there's a big story. You can take that back into the workplace and say, this is what we're about. And actually, there's a crafting that story. Actually, you really bring it to life for people, which I think is it's a very emotional. Coming back to your points earlier about the process communication model. Actually, if we can connect to that emotional level with people, we can convey the purpose. So when I talk about reigniting passion, um, I often talk about the fact that you've got to build the culture. And to build the culture, you've got to get to the emotional. You can't do it at a thinking level. You've got to get in at that emotional level, and you've got to craft the story. And I worked with a great coach a number of years ago who passed away in 2015. And he had the analogy of the campfire, with us all sitting around the campfire, telling the story of why the business was started. And to me, that's a really powerful thing, because the fire in the center is that spark that created us. And actually, if you can sit around and say, this is why we're here, this is what we do, and this is the meaning we bring to people's lives, actually, your business can really transform people's lives. It's just what it does to the employees get that. They just become more engaged, they want to be part of it, or they choose to get off the bus. Whichever they choose is the right thing.
Right. Yeah, it's okay. I mean,
Yeah,
people leaving is okay as long as it's for the right reasons.
yeah,
They
yeah,
say, this doesn't resonate with me. That's okay. And I love that visualization of the campfire, because whether we think about it as leaders of a campfire or a fireside, it is that fire that brings us together.
yeah.
And we say, let's tell some stories about our
Mm-hmm.
origin or the impact or
Yeah,
the challenge. And it's okay to tell stories about how, hey, it was hard. We thought we were going to be out of business, and here's how we got through that.
yeah, yeah. And I think the thing is that you mentioned about purpose earlier, and we were talking about what purpose meant. I think um, purpose doesn't work for everybody. My belief is, though, there's some business out there who want to generate a purpose and move on it. But there's lots of business who it doesn't mean anything for them. And actually, I'm not going to preach to the unconverted. This is talking to those to say, okay, just have an open mind about what purpose could do for your business, what it could do for your engagement in your teams. My belief is that it does guide you and move you in a different direction. And if that's not where you want to go, hey, it's not for you at this moment. Come and talk when you're ready. But actually, it doesn't work for everybody at this stage. But when you change and want to do something different, we'll talk about purpose. And I think that's the journey that people go on. Is they hit a point in their journey where they think there's something bigger out there. I want to do something different. If I've made all the money in my business, now what's next?
So if I'm a business leader or business owner, or in that type of a position, how do I know if I've got clarity of purpose, if I'm operating on purpose, or if I'm maybe just kind of operating on autopilot?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a typical one is, what does it feel like when you get out of bed in the morning? Do you bounce out of bed thinking, I'm going to work to go and do this thing, I'm going to change the world in some small way? Or do you drag yourself out thinking, another day at the office, another job, just the same old day, groundhog, here we go again? I think you get that gut feel that you're not on purpose. And I think you can spend a lot of time thinking about it, but actually it's when you feel it is the really key. And I use the work of Jim Collins a lot. And interesting, I started using Jim Collins's work back in the beginning of the time, 2001 or so, and then lost touch with it for a number of years. And I've come back into it the last few years through the work I do with scaling up. And the work of Jim Collins said, okay, let's be really clear about what's your, and Jim's language, big, hairy, audacious goal. And what he did is he looked at the businesses out there that are doing the best at the time and said, what is it that really gels them together? And he said they all had a purpose bigger than them, something out in the future they were trying to achieve. And that's the thing. And I think if you feel you've lost touch with what you're doing in your business or why your business exists, it could be that you're just not on purpose. And it may be that you need to go and find another business to do it with, or you need to reconnect to where you are today. So your question about how would someone know, it's that gut feel. It's when it just feels like you're doing the same old thing again and you're just not going anywhere. Your customers aren't connecting with you. Your business isn't transforming the lives of other people. And it just doesn't feel fun anymore. That's when I think you've got a point to reconnect with your purpose or reestablish it or establish it in the first place. Because actually businesses might have gone on for a bit and now we say, okay, what are we really about? What's the real reason we do what we do? That's the point in time you need to think about it. What's your take on that? Because obviously you must see this as well from a stateside in terms of purpose and businesses connecting back to why. And, we talk about the work of Simon Sinek often comes into these type of conversations. His great book, Start With Why, has that at heart. I wonder, what do you see in those businesses?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And from a purpose standpoint, I believe it's each of our own responsibilities to make that connection. So maybe I'm at a company and I feel like, wow, we're just not operating on purpose. Well, I can either wait for somebody else to create purpose, which I might be waiting a long time, or I can take responsibility for it. And, taking that responsibility as an individual might mean I need to find a different organization, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Or it might mean, you know what? The purpose is right here,
Mm.
and I can uncover it for myself and for my
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
I think for business, the thing they have to continually deal with is the continual fires and demands of the day that draw us away from the purpose into the problem solving that we have to deal with today. So I think for leaders, being intentional about how do we ensure that we stay linked to that purpose? How are we going to do that? And how do we prevent the urgency of what has to get done, hiring people and dealing with customers and innovating new products and releasing the next thing? How do we make sure that doing the business doesn't prevent us from connecting to the future?
Yeah. And I love that in the sense that of doing the business doesn't connect us to the future, because one thing I always talk about, and I've got a flip chart behind me. I was telling Dean earlier about some of the work I've been doing. On one of those other pages is a model of the world as I see it, in the sense that if I was to simplify business, actually business becomes 3 easy points to look at. And I learned this from a business called Sherlock's, which I worked with for a number of years. And we talked about a business being red, blue, black, or green. And the blue is the doing the business. It's the selling, making, delivering to the customer and servicing the customers. It's short-term revenue. And often business owners get into business because they're good at selling something or they're good at making and doing something. That could be a service. And they soon realize actually to make their business successful, they need to start accounting for it. So they have to start sending invoices and getting money in. And the accounting takes them away from the doing. And then they put IT systems in, and that takes them away from the doing as well. And then they might get some people, and they need HR systems. And these systems and other bits become the infrastructure that sits the side of the business. And that's the lifeblood. You can't do without it. But for most business owners, it's actually quite painful. So they employ someone to do it. But that lifeblood, I call red, because red is what Sherlock says. Yeah, it's the lifeblood of every business. You've got to have it. So typically you see businesses running as red and blue businesses. Blue is making money short term. Red is the admin and infrastructure behind it. And often if you took blue and red and said, blue business, take away the red aspect, you end up with a surplus. And some businesses just run red, blue, red, blue, red, blue all through their lives and eventually just close the doors. The successful ones, though, stop and say, what do I do with that surplus I've just made, which is the difference between the red and the blue? And they're the ones who invest it in the black, which sits at the top. And the black business is all around vision, positioning in the marketplace, products you're putting out there, and the channels to market. And it's when you take time out to invest time in black. And interestingly, people say, why red, blue, black? And I say, actually, because that's the color that every flip chart has 3 pens with it, red, blue, and black. So go get your red, blue, black pens and use them. But it's the black sits up there. And I said green as well. So green is about culture. And actually, if you invest time in the black aspects, the vision, the product, the positioning, and the channels, and the culture, guess what? That brings value long-term. So whereas red and blue just make short-term money, black adds value. That's the equity value. And often we need to take time out. And I say to people, how much time should you be doing that? And I say, if you grab your diary, and if we have one of those paper diaries that people used to have, and color them in with the red, blue, black, or green pens, what color is your diary? And most business owners, they say, oh, my diary's blue because I'm out servicing customers. Or my diary's red because I'm managing the back office of the company. And those who were most successful are the ones whose diary is black, predominantly if they're running it. Because I know then they've got a strategy that will move them in the future and they can think positively. So I think when you say about the demands, yes, we all get caught up in the demands, but the successful ones are the ones who make time for it. It's the same as going to the gym. It's the same as, this morning I got up early, went for a swim. And this may not be everybody's cup of tea, but investing time in yourself is really key. Because actually, it's only when you invest time in yourself that you're going to benefit for the future. And if we get wrapped up in the day-to-day and don't make time for ourselves, hey, guess what? We're going to suffer from aches and pains. We're going to get disease. We're going to get stressed. We're going to get anxious. And eventually we'll fall over. And the business will do the same. So that's my little rant on that. Actually, businesses, you need to take the time to step out and do the black and get out of the red and blue. Because the red and blue will make you money short term. The black brings you money long term. That makes sense. That's my take from Sherlock's from years ago, but I still come back to that. My red, blue, black, green pens.
Well, I think it's a very powerful model, and whether we apply that thinking to ourselves as an individual in our lives, to our families, to our communities, or to our businesses, it's the same issues and outcomes that we're dealing with. So if I'm a family that only focuses on, the output of earning money and doing things, and then the administration of running the household, and we're not thinking in terms of the generational impact, that black time, or the type of values and habits that we want to instill in the next generation, we're missing a huge opportunity.
I think this is a really key point. And I think, so coming back to that word purpose, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey. And when I think about 7 habits, he talks there about really being clear about where you're adding value. And to me, that family time is key, because I think too often we all get wrapped up in doing, and forget about the piece behind us, which is the family. And that support network, or the community in which we live in. And that's where the value comes longer term, because at some stage, we all have a responsibility. And yes, we can make money and spend money, but actually it's the other bit around supporting the other bit of us that provides value longer term. So actually, you're right. Black time for me is family. Black time for me is fitness and health, and a bit of community. Because I know that's the bit that brings value, not just for me, but for others longer term as well. And often we neglect that because we think we're too busy.
Yeah, that's remarkable. And I think it ties right back to purpose and intent of being able to step back and say, what is it that I really want to create? What is it that I really want? Right.
Yeah,
The ultimate coaching question, which is
yeah,
powerful for
yeah,
leaders, for individuals, as we live our life, as we decide how we're going to invest our time.
yeah.
And I think that's great advice. So as you think about, the thing that you wish that every leader could really hear, what is it that you want a leader or an individual to really understand?
Good question. So I think there's two things. And one of the things is one thing you said, that sometimes we as individuals need to step up and find our own purpose, because we may be working in a business that we're not clear on what the purpose is, but actually we have our own responsibility. It's up to us to carry our own bags, so to speak, and therefore each of us has our own responsibility. So that takeaway that I take from what you said is we can all find the responsibility we have and find the purpose in what we do, or we can make a choice, because that's a coaching point. We all have a choice about where we live, what we do, and how we do it. And we can, at some level, change that choice and go and do something different. And that's, I think, a big point from a coaching perspective. So I'd urge people to think about their own responsibility, think about carrying their own bags and not relying on other people all the time, and working out what their purpose is and how they bring that to life. And I come back again, and I always say as well, purpose at the end of the day lives within yourself. And sometimes you just need to reignite that spark. And the only way to do that is to take black time out and say, okay, how do I spend my black time investing in me? Because that's the thing that's going to drive value long term. So that would be my urge, my takeaway for other people. What about you? What would you take or give?
Well, I think both of those are spot on, and for me, it's very similar. I think the biggest thing is you can always choose your response.
Yeah,
And so often people operate from a standpoint of thinking other people are in charge of how they feel, and that's a very dangerous victim mindset to operate in.
yeah,
And so we always have the opportunity to choose our emotion in the moment, to choose our response,
yeah,
whether you're a leader or an individual. When you connect with that, everything changes. And so that's
yeah,
a big thing for me. And the other thing is getting better is not selfish. It's actually the only thing that changes the world. You have to improve as an individual if you're going to improve the world around you. So you have to invest in yourself.
yeah. I think that is so true. And when you said about choosing response, that reminds me. So one of the books I read during lockdown in the UK was Viktor Frankl's book. And when you say about that, about we can choose a response, the phrase there is between stimulus and response, there's a pause. And actually, it's in that gap that we can choose what we're going to do. And so that just comes to mind, that we are response able. And if we realize that, we can do whatever we want to long term. And that's the powerful piece. So thank you for that reminder, which I'd put in the back shelf and not looked at for a while. So thank you for that. So thank you.
I feel like we could go on forever, Phil.
Yes.
This is great stuff.
I think it's yeah, we could. And maybe actually, Dean, we should come back and do this again, because maybe there's an installment too to carry on the conversation. But thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I've enjoyed it, and I've learned loads as well. It's always good to talk to great people who have got a perspective on the world and see things the same and different to me. So thank you.
Well, and I appreciate the work that you're doing with organizations, because ultimately, when you change how an organization understands their purpose, you have the opportunity to affect positively the life of every person that's connected with that organization, whether it's an employee, a supplier, or a customer. Getting to that excitement, that reconnection of the purpose,
Yeah.
is a really a fulcrum point for changing and impacting positively the lives of everybody that touches that organization.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
am so appreciative of the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And I just throw that back at you again and say, hey, at the end of the day, without storytelling and communication, we couldn't get the message out. So it takes us all to work together.
So if people want to learn more about what Ignium and the work that you're doing, where would they go?
Yeah, good question. Thank you for asking that. So simply Ignium Consult, Ignium, Ignium consult.com. obviously the podcast. We have on the website, we've actually got a Spark Tank, and Spark Tank is about sparking ideas, and there's loads of content that you can just delve into there and pick up on. So you can see it, find us there. And obviously we write show notes with all these podcasts as well. So all the show notes have lots of detail in as well. And tell us for yourself, same for you in that case, Dean, where would people go to grab that information?
Sure. Yeah, they can connect with me at clarusresults.com, CLARUS results.com, or on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Dean Heffta on LinkedIn. So just search for that, or it'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much. And hey, it's 3:15 in the afternoon here. It's 9:15 for you. Time to wrap up, but thank you.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Phil.
I've enjoyed it.